Willkommen beim Nerds of Law Podcast. Die Nerds of Law, das sind Katharina Bisset und Michael Lanzinger. Wir präsentieren euch Neuigkeiten zu Recht und Technik, spannende Interviews sowie Tipps und Tricks generell zur geekigen Seite des Rechts. Denn vergesst nie, Law is the ultimate science.
Nerds of Law, Episode 40. Scalable Income with Joanna Penn. Hello and welcome everybody to today's Nerds of Law episode. As you can hear, it's another English episode, and that's because we've got a very special guest with us. I brought in Joanna Penn from the Creative Penn podcast, and I'm a major fangirl here. I've listened to Joanna's podcast for around a decade now, and it is mainly about writing, but we'll talk about that in detail. But I've learned so much from her about business, about writing and stuff, that I think every one of us can learn a lot. And that's why we brought Joanna here. So thank you for coming, and please tell our guests what else you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Katharina. And I'm just so thrilled to talk to you. And it's so exciting to meet people who've been listening so long. And of course, things change. Things have changed a lot in a decade in the world of writing and publishing. And we'll get into all that. But in terms of my background, I have degrees in theology and psychology, which have nothing to do with a lot of what I do now. But I was an IT consultant for 13 years, actually a very good German software company, SAP. I used to implement SAP software around the world, working in sort of big companies, small companies. And when I was in during that time, I just found myself very disillusioned with the world of corporates. And so I started writing my first non-fiction book way back in 2006. And that led to me discovering the world of publishing. And I decided to self-publish, and I started a blog, I started a podcast, and then I started writing novels. And in 2011, I left my day job to do this full time. So I've been a full-time creative entrepreneur for almost a decade now. And 2015, I sort of blew past my old income. So now I make more money than I did as an SAP consultant, which is quite satisfying. And yeah, so I've got over 30 books at this point, fiction and non-fiction. My fiction is fantasy. I know you write some fantasy, and action adventure thriller, and also crime thrillers. And I write non-fiction for authors, and started writing some more technology stuff. And I have two podcasts, the Creative Penn podcast and Books and Travel podcast, and I do international speaking and various things. But essentially, I'm a full-time creative with multiple streams of income.
Oh yes, and we'll have to talk about that in detail as well. But first up, you've always been a self-published author, and for lawyers, and when I first published, I did it self-published as well because I'm professionally paranoid about my rights. But what was your motivation behind that? What was your main motivation not to go for the classical agent, big publisher route?
Well, I certainly didn't have your legal knowledge, but what I did have was I was making a really good income as a consultant. And so I was always interested in making money with books. And so when I looked at publishing, and I was living in Australia at the time, when I looked at the publishing industry in Australia, I could see that it was going to take several years to get from a finished book to getting an agent and then maybe getting the books on the shelves. And so that was the first thing. It was the amount of time it was going to take. I was like, how does this take so much time? That is utterly ridiculous. And then also around sort of 2008, 2009, the Kindle arrived, and 2010, it sort of went international and ebooks began to be mainstream. And what happened there is I discovered that I could actually publish myself and reach readers in America, which of course is a huge market. And I know the digital market that in Germany has been a few years behind, and so is the UK. But what was happening in America is I could see that I could sell to these people in America and make far more money than I could taking a traditional publishing deal in Australia, because of course a lot of the publishing houses have very territorial rights. So that was the main thing. Is I'm a businesswoman, like you guys who understand business, even though I didn't necessarily understand intellectual property rights at the time. What I did understand was that I could do more on my own than these publishing companies could do for me in Australia. What I would say is that since then, of course, I do license some rights, and I did license one novel to a German publisher. I've licensed French rights, South Korean, I've got Polish in the works, and so I do license rights. I have no issue against that, but as you guys know, it's very important that you actively choose the rights that you license and make the most of what you have yourself in order to get your books out into as many readers' hands as possible in order to make a living. And that was always my goal from day one, is how do I make six figures as an author? And this looked like the best route to me.
That's really, really great. But I can imagine that must be quite a challenge to go from a well-earning employee to self-employed. So when suddenly, Michael had to deal with that when he went out on his own. I had to as well. How did you deal with all the different tasks, suddenly having to do everything from the legal aspects to marketing to your bookkeeping? And now you've been doing it for a decade. Are there things you outsourced, you got rid of, or are you still doing everything yourself?
No, it's a really good question. Well, for a start, I actually, at the time I left, I was a contractor. So way back in the year 2000 is when I started contracting. You can, obviously, as you guys know, you can get paid very well as an SAP contractor. So I started, in a way, kind of running my own business quite early on. And then I also started a scuba diving company. I started doing property investment in Australia. So I had actually started a number of companies before. So I knew about how company structure worked. I also specialized in SAP financials. So I worked in the financial area of the company, even though I'm not an accountant. So I understood a lot about cash flow and about money management and about setting up the basics of a business, and about, I always worked with an accountant, for example. But then when I moved into the creative realm, maybe that's the first lesson, which is a creative business where your product is your art doesn't have, has a lot in common with any other business, with a legal practice or with a mining company.
Creative too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, creative too. But as in the mining company I used to work for, they had accounts payable. They had a product. They, even though they produced coal and I produced books, the business structure is still the same. So I definitely had a lot in place, and I credit my years in consulting with understanding a lot about business. But obviously, book marketing was a whole new thing. So that was something I had to learn. And in fact, every time I had to learn something, I wrote a book about it. So How to Market a Book is based on, the first edition came out like many years ago. It's now on its third edition. And as I learn more, I update my books and share them on the podcast and everything. But in terms of now, I have a bookkeeper, obviously I have an accountant, and I have outsourced some marketing. I have a virtual assistant, Alexandra, who's in Canada, and we've never met. And we've only Skyped twice in about 6 years.
I haven't met mine yet either, so.
Yeah, exactly. So,
awesome.
This is,
it is
awesome. Yeah. So I think we are, and Alexandra helps with things like the transcript for my podcast and, updating links and things, which I just don't like doing. So I do have people who work with me, but I am the sole employee of the Creative Pen. I'm the director. My husband's also a director. Company structure obviously depends on your situation. But what I would say is, if people listening are thinking about starting a creative business, then it is, learning the basics of business running as opposed to just the craft is really important. And I continue to read business books, finance books, money management stuff, marketing things. There's the craft of writing, and then there is the business of writing. And both of those things are important to know.
But that's a thing that you also talk about as well, is that you got very diversified. You said you're writing fiction and non-fiction, you've got the podcast, etc. But as lawyers, we often run around with your billable hours, old school billing structures, and a job that for some hasn't changed since the old Roman times. And from you, I learned a lot about the multiple streams of income that you mentioned in the beginning, and you're very exclusivity averse. And what I would like, and what I'd like our listeners to learn about that is to get away a bit from this billable hour system, but more to invest in IP and have a work that just brings in money eventually. How does it work for you?
That's such a good question, and I understand that lawyers are essentially, it is money for your time. It's the same as me when I was a contractor. You're paid for the time that you work on a project, and if you don't work on a project, you don't get paid. And so that is essentially yeah, exactly. It's money for time, and that's the same if if you're listening and you just have a day job, you're an employee, or if you're running your own legal practice and you're still paid per hour. I mean, you're not an employee as such, but you're still paid for your time. And as you say, what is exciting about intellectual property rights is that you're creating this intellectual property asset, and the idea is that you spend time on it once. So you spend X amount of time writing your book, and then you can earn money from that book even if you are not actually working on it at the time. So I call this scalable income. So you make it once, and then it can earn you money for the rest of your life and 70 years after you die, according to copyright law, or 50 years, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So to me, when I discovered this a few years into writing, actually, I only really learned about this stuff because they don't teach this stuff to writers generally. They're just like, oh, write a book and then sell it to publishers.
It's
and
totally
they'll
a book
deal
we
with
still
all.
have to write.
Yeah, exactly. They'll deal with all that. So basically, my goal is to make as much of my income scalable as possible. So, for example, when I, as a contractor back in 2008, when I still had my day job, during the global financial crisis, they laid 400 of us off in one day. And at the time, that was my only stream of income. And as I left the building, with my letter in my hand, I was going, I don't have any other income. Like, this is a disaster. And a lot of people have obviously found this during the pandemic as things have changed. But the beauty of having books and, for example, I count podcasting as a scalable form of income if you have monetized it. Things like affiliate income or sponsorship. These things can continue earning you money even if you are not physically working. So now my income's about 80% scalable. So as in, even if I died today, about 80% of my income will keep coming in for a good amount of time. And then if someone actively managed my estate, it would go very well indeed. So this is what I want people to think about is, okay, your income right now, what percentage of your income is money for time, and what percentage is scalable? So as lawyers, I mean, you don't have, I know you have some fiction, Katharina, but it could be some downloadable forms that people can use to analyse their legal situation. That could be an example of intellectual property, that if people come to your website, they can download that and pay for them, and that will just keep making money. You created it once and it will earn over and over again. Or, for example, when GDPR happened, I'm sure you guys know all about GDPR.
Yes, we know everything about it. Everything.
Exactly. And so at the time, I did a webinar, a lawyer did a webinar on GDPR, and she was offering a package, with the wording for your privacy policy, the wording for your cookie notice. And I was like, yes, just let me pay for that. And I spent, a couple of £100, downloaded her legal pack with these templates in, and I was happy and she was happy because, she sold all these templates. That to me is a great example of a scalable product for a lawyer. I mean, what are some of the things that you guys do, or that you encourage your audience to do in terms of scalable income?
Yeah, I think the forms and things like that. We work a lot of with legal tech businesses where contract generating and stuff like that is a big issue, but also the whole publishing, online courses. I mean, both Michael and I, Michael, you've got a copyright audiobook out there, a privacy audio.
Fun thing is that you mentioned the GDPR, because this was, I can say, I've
with the scalable income, I only had to do one once in my life so far as a lawyer, and this was concerning to the GDPR, because me and a friend of mine, we did an audiobook for creatives on the GDPR, and it was the hot shit for about 1.5 months, and it sold like crazy.
Oh, that's great.
We did it once, and money kept coming in. It was very good. And then we did another one on copyright law, and no one really bought it. So the second time, it was the perfect time with the GDPR, but not the best time for the copyright law. So.
I also think, I think that some of these things trickle in over time. And the beauty of, I mean, obviously copyright law does change a little bit, but a lot of it is pretty settled, for now. And so I can see why creatives wouldn't buy that. And I have the same problem I have a book called Business for Authors, and that book doesn't really sell very much. And the reason why is authors don't want to run a business. And authors actually, for some reason, don't want to know about copyright law. They think someone else will handle it. But
I bought it.
You bought it. But you're already a business person. So, and this is what's so interesting about understanding these scalable things is sometimes, as you say, you don't know what's going to work, and sometimes you try something and it doesn't work at the time, but then maybe later it's going to work really well as people become educated in these different ways. So, for example, I just put out Your Author Business Plan, and which I'm going to put into German actually, because it's turned out to be very popular in English. And what I think has happened is the market has moved on since 2014 when I put out Business for Authors, and authors are beginning to be educated in these things. So what you might find, Michael, is that your copyright thing might sell more as German-speaking authors and creatives learn more about copyright. And a tip would be to do a podcast episode on copyright, for creatives, and then upsell your evergreen product as such. So those are the types of things I do with my courses in particular, and I also make books out of my courses now. So Your Author Business Plan started as a course that I then turned into a book and an audio book and a print book and a workbook and all these different things. So turning our IP into multiple streams of income is also another tip.
Plus, I think it might be easier if you're self-publishing and you say, okay, there is this one half a chapter that changed since I published it. I'll just republish it with that 3 pages, swapped out. If you have to go through a publisher, that's quite a hassle. So now you can just do it and say, okay, there's a new version. This one thing has changed, or you sell an add-on or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that definitely happens. I mean, you guys know about tech. Things change in tech all the time. So, that is another tip, is that to try and do things that are more evergreen around mindset or attitudes, or, things that might not actually change so much, as opposed to, for example, Facebook advertising, where the screens might change from week to week sometimes.
So you said new technology, and you talk on your podcast a huge amount about technology, where, like in law, there are writers who sit in front of their computers, ideally, type their thing, and then don't care about the rest, whilst you are extremely, extremely invested in technology. So what are the things you are most excited about at the moment, or what are the things you're implementing? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess with the world as it is now, as we're recording this in the beginning of 2021, still within a global pandemic. And what's interesting is the stuff I've been doing for a decade, and you guys have been doing for a decade, and obviously you've had T. Morris on talking about podcasting, things that we put in as a business model, the global digital scalable business model, which I've been doing, since 2008 when I first really set everything up. has now come of age. So I was just reading a McKinsey consulting report on how fast the changes are happening because of the pandemic and the switch to digital. So even that, talking about German language readers in Germany and Austria and Switzerland and around the world, sort of people who might have been resistant to reading or an ebook or listening to a digital audiobook, or even sort of France, which has been further behind, Italy's been further behind, Spain. All of these markets are shifting to digital, and people who only bought print books in bookstores are now buying the print books online. So what's happened in the last 18 a year as we record this, but let's face it, it's going to go on for at least 18 months, is that people's behavior has shifted to a way that benefits people who run their business with technology. So if you're happy with podcasting and Zoom, you're happy to jump on client calls online when the pandemic sent everyone home. Or if you're already writing and selling across the world, so I've sold books in 159 countries, and that was before the pandemic. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the percentage of revenue is now split between different countries, whereas it used to be predominantly US, UK, Canada, Australia. Now I think it's becoming much more variable. So that's something that is sort of tech that you and I and all of us are kind of used to has now become mainstream. But then in terms of what I'm thinking about for the future, I'm, in fact, on my podcast as we're recording this, an episode just went out called Co-Writing with Artificial Intelligence with a Sri Lankan author, Yudhanjaya Wijaratne, who has co-written with using GPT-2 tools, which is a natural language generation tool, and some other things, and is sort of co-creating with these AI tools in order to create something new. And so I'm very excited about the potential of the way we can use tools to enhance our creativity, but also technologies like blockchain, which I'm pretty sure are going to revolutionize some of the things in the legal market, potentially with smart contracts. Yes, if it can be. Well, I think it will. I mean, the smart contract idea is something that is very interesting, and I'm certainly want to try using smart contracts and how we can start to do these things that will enable even more global, scalable business models. So at the moment, I'm looking at these from a sort of perspective of, okay, 2030 might be when these things actually change. But again, you and I have been doing this for a decade, and now it's gone mainstream. So what are the things that I can start now that in a decade are going to be mainstream? So I want to protect my business in the future, as well as continuing to create now. So, I mean, what do you guys think about AI and blockchain in particular, I guess, in the legal side?
Good question. I go with the lawyers, it depends.
I'm actually wearing my It Depends sweater today.
Now, artificial intelligence, I'm reminded that always when I use Siri on my car via the telephone, I'm every time once more reminded that the AI overlords still have a long way to go before they can go and conquer the world with the current language processing. But I think artificial intelligence definitely is a thing, but for the time being, I think we also can use algorithms in a very good way. And as for blockchain, I think there is a rather big hype around it, and some things I think can work, some things won't work. So the self-executing contract is legally a bit problematic.
And as always, the technology is years ahead of the law. So these are things that need to be dealt with on an EU level. So by the time the EU gets around to put that in place, we'll be 5 years down the road, and whatever we're talking about's old news already. And I think a bit the problem is also from a legal perspective that you have a lot of clients who want to use new technologies, like Michael just said, blockchain, for the sake of it, because it's cool, because you have to have something with blockchain now, and make themselves more work than they actually have to. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, I need this thing, and no matter the cost and no matter the legal implications, I just have to have the thing.
Oh yeah,
Full
absolutely.
disclosure, we're not a bit better. So
No.
we also have to have every gadget just for the sake of it, and we think about the use cases later. So
We usually tell each other that we can't do that.
yeah, so that's our both of us, our guilty pleasure kind of.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And as I said, I'm not using any of these things right now. I say I'm not using them, but you mentioned algorithms. To me, that is what I mean by artificial intelligence. We're talking about, very narrow AI tools, of which you could say the Amazon A9 algorithm is artificial intelligence, or, Google search, or Facebook advertising, or, all of these things that we use, like you said, Siri. These things use sort of big data engines to produce things, and to me, that's all I'm really talking about is the narrow AI. And I already use like the internet when I write my book. Well, we're recording over the internet, and we're using tools that the technology of the internet is 40 years old now, and yet it took 25 years of that 40 years to really start to change the way that people live and do business. Maybe it took the smartphone, and a whole load of things went in place. But what I think is, I'm 45. I'm 45 as we record this, and so I hopefully will have at least another 45 years to make money while I'm still alive as an author. And what I want to do is position myself for success, as I have managed to position myself for success since 2008, 2009, starting a podcast that now makes me a full-time living on its own, because I was early in the market. So for me, it's about what technologies can I start to use now, or start to play with now. And natural language generation is certainly something that I think will probably be used, or is already being used within the legal market, for generating some of these types of documents. And how can we use those tools to help us be better at our jobs and our creativity, and have a better business, rather than jump on any hype. It's more about how do we position ourselves, I guess, and also just about learning about the things that may disrupt our industry. I think that's important too.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you read a book about legal tech and what lawyers have to do about their websites, and they still talk about, your website needs to be mobile optimized, and I'm thinking like, that's adorable.
Is this a decade ago?
I wish I could say yes, but I can't. No, the thing is, we're really
Katharine
behind.
wants to tell you is that we lawyers are the only kind of people that still send their nudes via postal services. Okay, so that's what we are.
Yeah, something like.
And now we got the PG rating again.
Yeah, very good, Michael. Thank you for that.
Thanks. Thanks.
But what you do and what you talk a lot about, not just when it comes to audiobooks, and that's a fight. I've been talking a lot about that on the podcast. There are not enough audiobooks in law for me.
Amen to that.
Natural language processing. So what about voice first instead of mobile first? And how are audiobooks doing in the big wider world that makes it so interesting for you?
Yeah, well, this is a great question, and exactly what you're saying. The user really wants books in audio in their own language, possibly even in their own dialect, because that's how we like to listen to books. So the only way to reach, and I mean, German is pretty common language, right, compared to some of these smaller countries and languages where they probably don't have much at all in audio.
But most of us speak English, so that's the threshold for an English book is very low.
Yeah, exactly. But I think what the point with audio in different languages is we do not have the money or the time to produce everything in audio format without artificial intelligence. So, I mean, the voice tech at the moment is very, very good. And the gaming industry is, pushing this forward as they do. So, the voices that you can get within games, may have been built on original human voices and then tweaked or whatever, or licensed. So what we haven't seen yet is AI narrated books on platforms like Audible or Storytel or some of these other platforms, because there's a lot of legal sides around protecting the narrator industry. But what we're going to, Google Play have already announced this year that they're going to start putting out, well, they have already put some AI narrated books on Google Play, but they're all out of copyright books, they're public domain. So, but what they're starting to do is work with publishers on producing audio with AI voices for the books that do not have audio already licensed. So that will actually cover a lot of things like textbooks. I mean, I imagine it's very expensive to record a legal textbook in audio, and
also not terribly exciting.
Yeah, exactly. A human might find that really boring, but for you guys, it might be just a case of putting it on 1.5x speed and just consuming that information. You don't need, a professional actor to narrate your legal textbook. It's just not necessary.
I think with more professional voice actors, it would be kind of cool to really get into the motion.
But how are you going to deal with like half-page footnotes of the court said this and that, and court
the thing
it also depends on the quality. So, and then we have the contract.
Yeah. So basically, sorry, I was going to say. So you can already. I was going to say, you can license voices. So Samuel L. Jackson, the actor, is already a licensed voice within Amazon's Alexa. So how I think it's going to work is you're going to have these professional actors whose voices are licensed for performing audio. And you might be able to choose Samuel L. Jackson to read your legal textbook. And in terms of the emotion, it's already pretty good. So I have a voice double, and I've done some shows on this before with my voice double, having a conversation with another friend of mine's voice double, and it's getting a lot closer. And I think what's going to happen is that there'll be a sort of front end editor, emotion editor or something, where you'll be able to put the whole thing in, and then you'll be able to tweak various levels of emotion to edit the audio, and that will produce it much faster. But I also think that the audio rights will split. So, you guys know at the moment a lot of the audio rights licensing will be for the whole what they call story, which also includes the whole book for a non-fiction. Whereas what I think is going to happen is that the rights will stratify into human narrated edition, an AI narrated edition, which will be a lot cheaper, and then maybe a sort of premium audio production with soundtrack and all of that. So then what you can do as a consumer is you can say, yes, I want to pay the premium rate for a human narration, or I really don't care, just give me the content and I'm happy to have an AI read it. So I think that's how it will go in the future, which will protect narrators, protect the human element, but also make the vast majority of work available in audio, which we desperately need. We really do.
Yeah, and I mean that's also a very, very interesting legal challenge from a copyright law, because the whole teaching an AI on the basis of copyrighted work, even if you bought it originally. So if you take 20 Stephen King novels, feed it into an AI, even if none of the sentences that the AI generates is a copy of what Stephen King wrote. So there's still nothing in that. But with voice, at least there's a little bit, because there's the right to one's own picture. And that can be used for voice as well in some cases. So the right to your own voice can be protected if it's in your interest, but that's a very difficult balance to fight that in court. But I'd be the first one to do that. I mean, I paid a tenner to have Billy Connolly narrate my sat nav, so
Well, this is the thing. I think that we are coming to a point where intellectual property rights law and AI are sort of meeting. I just in 2020 I did a submission to the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and also the UK government on precisely this. These were submissions about what do you think about licensing various things from data, and how does it work if an AI creates something new? Is that copyrighted work in the AI, in the creator of the AI? Yeah, well, exactly. All of these questions become quite difficult. But with voice, certainly something like Samuel L. Jackson, obviously I never saw his contract with Amazon, but you would have expected that they would have done some kind of contract around licensing his voice. And I've certainly been talking to various technical companies about licensing my voice, because I would love it if, you could say, oh, do you know, like Joanna's voice, I'd like her to narrate my English version of my book, for example, and then that would be another micro payment stream of income for licensing my voice. In the same way that I would love to package up my IP rights, my books into a data package, and then I would love to license that to a natural language generation model, and you might again there might be a micro payment for using my data to train an algorithm, whereas at the moment there is nothing in place, and so it is neither I guess it's not illegal, but is it ethical to use, as you say, Stephen King's books? And in fact, I just did this last week. I trained an algorithm on my own data, and then I took a whole load of books from Project Gutenberg, which are all out of copyright works, and trained a model on those things. But the problem is it's just not big enough to generate anything interesting, whereas the models like GPT-3 are coming up with really interesting stuff, but we don't know what data it was trained on. So that's where I think the difficult line is. But for example, from a legal perspective, how would anyone know? How would, if there is no plagiarism, then how does anyone know anyway?
That's exactly the problem. So right now you have to work with contracts, really, if you decide to go out there. And if you develop an AI, you have to work with the contracts and make sure if there's no law to protect you, you need the contracts to protect you. And that's, I think, the biggest thing you have to do at the moment. It's the same story with the monkey and his selfie, where they fought it all the way to decide if the monkey who took the selfie, who would be the author? Could it be copyright protected or not? And, if you set something up, where's the threshold? Is the one who made the AI the author? Like, I would never say Bill Gates owns the book I write in Word. If I would write in Word, would be more the Scrivener dudes. But these are the things we have to talk about, and all we have at the moment is theories and contracts. But
it's interesting because it's not just theories and contracts. So the example of the author I interviewed on my podcast today, and I've got another one coming up soon, have actually sold books, one through traditional publishing, one through the indie route, using these AI tools, and the copyright vests with them for their finished work. So that's not in question. Their books are their copyright, but the question is the data that these models were trained on. Those authors don't get any recompense for their work in training the algorithm. So I think we're missing a whole load of rights, which are the right, the right to train an algorithm with this data. I don't believe that exists in a publishing contract. Publishing contracts don't include that, and yet that is probably what we need, which is, yes, I license my works in copyright to be used in training an algorithm that will then generate work. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, but that's where you're back to knowing as an author what it says in your contract, because obviously the rights are so vast, like all future imaginary technologies, to kind of that extent are the clauses that you can find these days. So that would include using the books to teach, and that's a vast body of knowledge that the publishing companies have. And if you don't know about that as an author, you're giving away a lot of rights, even though it might not be worth much today. It might be 5 years down the road, because suddenly everyone wants a novel that's like yours and wants to train their AI on your novels.
No, absolutely. It's an area that is urgent because this is happening now. And yet, as you guys have said, the law is very, very slow. And yet, the longer we don't have laws around this, or the longer we don't have guidance around this, it is like the Wild West right now. And I think what we need is some kind of idea of how this is going to work. So I'm certainly trying to get involved with creative groups and organisations, like I said, and also the WIPO and the UK, and hopefully, I'm in England, so I can't get involved in the EU law now, but hopefully... Yeah, exactly. But we can talk about it between us, and hopefully people in each of their countries will consider getting involved in this. But I mean, the other issue, of course, is that bits cross borders, as they say, and the AI tools and digital publishing, these are all cross-border activities pulling data off the internet to train algorithms don't respect borders. So even if someone in the EU says this isn't legal, that doesn't actually stop anyone else doing it.
In China, in God knows where.
Yeah, in China, point at China or the US. I mean, what was interesting is this author Yudun Jaya, he works for a data policy group in Asia, and he actually said out of the US and China right now that China actually has a better draft sort of data protection thing than the US does. So
that's not surprising.
Yeah,
I think,
exactly.
I think everybody does. I think everybody
there you
in the
go.
whole wide world has a better understanding of data protection.
Yes, but it's interesting. So
Maybe also
let's
in
take
space.
let's take the German language, for example. We haven't talked about this. So I have 3 books out in German, non-fiction, and they were translated using the DeepL AI translation engine. So that gave me the first draft. And then I worked with a German editor and some proofreaders and beta readers to finesse the last 10%, whatever. So it's interesting, and there are all kinds of interesting things there. But one of the reasons I did that is because of if I use a German translator in Germany, the copyright of that first of that draft belongs to them. Whereas if I use an AI engine to generate the first draft, it belongs to me. So there's something really interesting already, and this is what's going to be fascinating about the different jurisdictions, is that people will do stuff like that in order to retain copyright or do things in different areas. So how do you guys think this is going to play out?
I think we'll use it. I think the people who know about it and who are knowledgeable about it, like you just said, will use it to find the most convenient jurisdiction. It's a bit like a race to the bottom, a race to the top, depending on what you're aiming for. But if you say, I can get my work translated. I mean, there are, native German speakers in the US as well. So let's see which jurisdiction suits me best and then find a translator there.
Let's say it was also a lot cheaper. It was €7.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can get a Swiss German. I mean, no one's going to be able to read that, but it might be more
Exactly.
expensive than German translation or something like that. But then we're back to AI. It's like, yeah, but do you really need a translator when you can chuck it into DeepL and just need someone to edit it?
Well, and actually, translators are now using DeepL as their first draft, because why wouldn't you? And as all of us, I think this is what it comes back to for me, is I love what I do. I love being a writer. I am never going to just press a button and publish the book that comes out. In the same way that you press the DeepL button and you don't publish what spits out the other side, what you do is edit it and change it and make it your own. And I think that's what we need to consider around AI and creative tools and all of the things that we can do, which is let's use those tools, as you say, in an ethical and legal manner to for our own businesses and our own creative expression. And that makes it very exciting, having that attitude towards it.
I mean, I've studied a couple of semesters of translation at uni, and I mean, we've been far away from DeepL back then. That's been a bit over a decade ago. But tools where you feed your own technical terms, where you teach it to translate some sentences in a way. So that's been normal, and it's just never been this, oh my God, you used an AI to translate. Well, yes, of course, because if I would type that whole thing and it's, it doesn't change anything about your linguistic skills, and I still translate a lot, obviously, in my day-to-day life. But no one would be able to afford it if I would type the whole terms and conditions. If I read it, have it side by side, and basically just edit it, 10 times as fast, and it doesn't change anything about the quality. It just saves me a lot of typing. And yeah, I think that's where AI sometimes has a bad rap, because people say, "Oh my God, that was just an AI translation." Yes, if you use it as a very bad draft by maybe a student who doesn't speak English terribly well but has a basic grasp on the language, and then you work over it, then that's a good thing. So yeah, but I'd like to come back a bit now about the publishing, because a lot of lawyers are stuck to, when they write something, some legal articles, books, etc., they're really bound to the legal publishing houses, etc. And they're obviously very local, because you've only got, the law is very local, just in like a EU perspective. You can publish a book in multiple countries, so there's the legal and the language barrier. But if you say, okay, you want to go away from the traditional legal publishing and go out and say, I want to go indie as a lawyer and as a legal publisher, as a legal author, what would your advice be to, in a world where this is not a thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously I can't comment on what the topics that people are writing about, because I imagine that legal publishers also have legal counsel and legal editors who make sure that what you're writing is actually legally correct. So I would say that, but let's take, yeah, sometimes, exactly. But let's take a sort of a topic that, let's say the sort of the mindset of a successful lawyer. Let's say that, the successful lawyer mindset. That would be a book that, you wouldn't necessarily need specific legal advice on. So what I would say first is, what is your definition of success with this book? So who are the types of people you want to reach? Now, that type of book, you could say, would be appropriate for every lawyer in the world, potentially, but they do have to be a lawyer. So then it's a question of, okay, publishing is really easy. Publishing is the simplest part of the process. The difficult parts are writing and editing and also marketing your book. So publishing now now, I mean, you can get books on, obviously, I mean, I've got an ebook called Successful Self-Publishing, which goes into all the technical detail, also available in German. And that goes into all the different websites. But for example, you can get your book on Amazon in ebook and print and also audiobook by going to, kdp.amazon.com and ACX. That would be one route. There are lots of other variations on that theme. Then, I mean, the main thing is getting all your stuff ready, and that is working with an editor, working with a book cover designer, deciding where you're going to position your book, and then also considering your marketing, because I presume if you publish with one of these legal publishing houses, they will get your book into legal bookstores and legal magazines and stuff like that. So what I would suggest is your podcast is a fantastic example. I would pitch you guys around an interview on the legal author mindset or something like that. I would also pitch every other legal podcast that is around. I'm sure there are lots of different ones. I would also consider, you could even think about advertising, things like Facebook. I presume there are legal groups on Facebook you could target. Yeah, and with your marketing, you could put a paid ad in one of the legal journals. Like, there are lots of different ways to do marketing. I mean, you could pitch to speak at some of the legal conferences or legal Zoom conferences that there are now. I mean, there are tons and tons. I mean, there's some great ideas around this. You could even try and partner with a university or a college or whatever that will co-publish. You could say, look, I will put your branding on my legal mindset book and do a special print run, and that will just cost you this amount. I've actually interviewed a guy around this idea of bulk sales, and this kind of corporate publishing can be incredibly lucrative. You can do print runs of 5,000, 10,000, more than that for specific companies. So that's another way to go, the idea of bulk sales. So I can think of loads of ways that you could make money with this kind of book that would
Michael,
go
you're
far
taking
beyond.
notes, aren't you?
We get back to you, okay? So I'm taking notes, and we get back to you. So.
Yeah, well, I think that you might find that bulk sales interview really interesting, because I think this kind of corporate publishing, I want to try and do. I'm trying to think of some ways I could actually do that. Or, for example, I got approached by magazines when they have the free books that go with magazines. So I don't know. There's probably a magazine called The Lawyer. Would they give away your book as part of their subscription for a fixed fee? A lot of magazines do that kind of thing. So there are so many ways that you could turn your book into a course. You could do a workbook. There are just lots and lots of things that you could do. So what I would say is, try and just think outside the legal publisher box and consider that there's this whole world of people out there who might be interested in what you have to say. I mean, there are lawyers in every single country in the world. This is something, and I presume the successful mindset would be quite similar, a bit like my book, The Successful Author Mindset. That might be an idea. Obviously, you can do an audiobook. I use Findaway Voices for my audiobooks now, and they distribute to a whole load of the wide audio publishers. So Storytel is, I think, in Germany, as well as Audible and Austria, where you guys are. But also Spotify, for example, is going to get into audiobooks, we believe, maybe this year. So there are more possibilities than ever of what you can do. You just have to think beyond what has been done in the past, and just kind of, I mean, even writing, I was just thinking of you guys, how to write a novel if you're a lawyer, or how to write a book if you're a lawyer, because I meet so many lawyers who want to become writers. They just can't seem to escape a lot of over control around putting stuff out there in the world.
I don't know what you mean.
Exactly. But lawyers are writers. This is what's so brilliant. Lawyers know how to write. What they struggle with is, well, what if I put the book out there and something happens? What happens to my reputation? But I mean, Katharina, you use a pen name for your
yes
fiction.
Yes, absolutely. And it's secret, but I don't go like that way around. I don't go say, oh yeah, those are the other books I wrote, because if people Google me, I want them to find my attorney website, etc., not the fiction book I wrote. But that was a very psychological trick I've done as well. I wrote the fiction in English. So I can't write fiction in German for some reason.
Well, maybe you should just put it through DeepL and then edit it.
I've done, but I chucked it into DeepL, but I haven't gone around the editing bit yet. But I started off writing it in English because the writing community I was in, like my husband and like T, everyone wrote in English, so I thought I might as well. And there's a bigger audience, like you said. But the legal stuff I wrote mainly in German, so that was always the kind of two parts of my brain kind of separated by language, if that makes any sense. I mean, I've written legal stuff in English as well, but it's much harder for me. I tried a short story in German. It did not work.
Well, maybe that's your first tip for the successful legal mindset is write in different languages or use pseudonyms or whatever. I do think that there are ways to break out of whatever mindset is stopping you. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to think wider than the world that you work in with the legal world. You can think a lot bigger when it comes to your creative work.
I have to say, I also have a pen name. It's not a secret because it's my Twitter account also, and I only got published, I think, twice, and it was always with fiction and always in English. And
we have to tell us your pen name now. Tell us your pen name.
Oh, it's Liebkraft.
It's Lovecraft.
There we go.
In German.
It's a very kind of bad translation of Lovecraft, because I simply love Howard Phillips Lovecraft. It's my favorite author. So he's my favorite.
There you go.
author.
Yeah, brilliant. I've written a Lovecraft style short story, and in fact I put some of the Lovecraft books into my AI engine. Yeah. There are a couple that are out of copyright.
Then your engine is very good trained, because he used synonyms and words no one else uses. Mainly unnameable.
So now I want to know, because you've talked about your AI engine and stuff like that. Now I want to know, what are your favorite tools, hardware, software? If people want to play around, what's your go-to stuff?
Oh, well, I mean, the tools that people can use in general. I mean, you mentioned Scrivener. I write every book in Scrivener. So I've written like over 30 books with Scrivener now. I just don't understand how people can write without it. And it's also useful whether you're doing, anything that involves structured writing. I think it's just brilliant because, as you know,
recipes are organized in Scrivener as well.
There you go, exactly. You can use it for everything. It doesn't just have to be books. But Scrivener is probably my number one. And then I use Vellum. Vellum for the Mac. It's Mac only, but for formatting ebooks, it is like a miracle. It makes formatting fun, which most people don't find ebook formatting fun. But it is fun. So they would probably be my favorite software in terms of my writing and publishing business. They're the ones I would struggle to do without. Well, I mean, I don't want to give particulars because it changes all the time. But if people go to thecreativepen.com/future, there's some of the various topics that we've been talking about. But there's also a list of the writing tools that you can use right now to play with these various different AI generation, creative writing stuff. So that's probably the best thing. Go to thecreativepen.com/future.
You just made Michael's show notes taking, because he's the one taking the notes. That's why he's usually so quiet.
I've just moved over there.
Very
good. Well, you can find like about halfway down, there's like a list of AI writing tools, and there's a list there. And I
see it.
Yeah, you see it. Yeah, there's so many of these that come out all the time, and it just, you have to update it every week, basically.
Oh, Oh God, this is going to be expensive, isn't it?
Oh yes.
Playing with various things. A lot of them have a free level where you can just play with things, and there are other things. What you have to consider is that this is just the beginning of where this is, and most people playing with this stuff, like the authors who are playing with it, are programmers, and I'm not a programmer. So what we're going to see in the next year or two are more and more tools for people who are not programmers. So I think the list will only grow over time.
So, but I have to also do a disclaimer here. If our listeners are starting to listen to your podcast now, make sure you have someone to take notes, because we usually listen to podcasts on road trips. So there's always someone else who can take notes. Like, oh, you have to write that down, that I need to download that. Oh, I've just had another idea for a book. So whoever's driving keeps, and the other one needs to take notes. So
I appreciate that. There's also I do have a transcript on every single one of my podcast episodes. So
if you binge about 10 in a row, it's hard which one it was.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. I'm really happy that you found my show useful, and I've really enjoyed being on this show. So, and if people have any questions, I'm thecreativepenn.com, and there's everything's over there, really. That's probably the best place to come.
Michael, you've got any questions left?
Only two. The first thing is, do you happen to know the it's a hardware thing, the free write?
Oh yes, okay, it's just like a basic thing that doesn't attach to the internet. Yeah, I've seen them. I haven't used one myself. I'm very happy with my MacBook Pro. Haven't needed to move on to anything else, but I have seen them. Yeah.
Yeah, I have both now. The first one, which really looks like a typewriter, and also the Traveler edition. And I tend to write sometimes on the Traveler edition, and it's a bit strange, but also very very cool to say.
It's got about 50 different things you can take notes on and write on.
Yeah. I got one more this morning.
Oh God.
It's
there you go.
So yeah. And the other question is Star Trek or Star Wars?
I think that's a tough one. Probably Star Trek.
I know. Thanks.
because well, you guys, you're Star Trek as well, aren't you?
I said Lord of the Rings when he asked me.
Wait, you didn't allow that option. Although it's funny you should say that, because my husband is just Lord of the Rings geek, and we were walking up the hill and he was quoting from Legolas or something, and he's like, "That is from the Holy Book." The Holy Book of Lord of the Rings.
I mean, there are good Legolas quotes for most situations in life. Let's face it.
Exactly. Well, look, I love the Nerds of Lore. I think you guys are awesome. Do you have a T-shirt
Thanks.
already?
Yeah, we've got one, but we haven't gone into mass production yet. It says in the front, "Demons run when a good lawyer goes to court."
Well, I think you need a print-on-demand Nerds of Lore T-shirt.
Yeah, we definitely do. It's big on our wish list of things we need to do. Yeah, we'll do that, and I'll send you the link. So,
awesome. Well, and hopefully I might see you guys in Vienna sometime, or maybe at Frankfurt Book Fair or something like that.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
I'd love to go there at some point.
That would be awesome.
And we can do it again.
Great honor having you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show.
Ja, thanks a lot.
Danke, dass ihr beim Nerds of Law Podcast zugehört habt. Auf unserer Webseite nerdsoflaw.com könnt ihr das Impressum, Datenschutzinformationen und viele spannendere Dinge finden. Dieser Podcast ist durch eine Creative Commons by Non-Commercial 4.0 International License geschützt. Das bedeutet, ihr dürft den Podcast kopieren, mit Freunden teilen, mit der Information, wo der Podcast herkommt, und ihn nicht für kommerzielle Zwecke verwenden. Das Urheberrecht für die Musik liegt bei Mick Bourday. Ihr findet seine Webseite unter mickbourday.com. Live long and prosper. Eure Nerds of Law.